So in this video we're going to take a look at adding our first enemy to the battle. So what we're going to do today is we're simply going to add an enemy to our battle board, and I'm going to show you how you can interact with that enemy by animating the enemy when they get attacked when we press some keys. So to begin with, I've gone ahead and I've created an enemy. It's based on something that Patchwork provided. So thanks to him for providing this enemy, which is called Rock Cat Roll. Apparently is crazy addicted to Jimi Hendrix, so that's the theme of this enemy. So basically what I've done is I've created an enemy and I've created some animations. So you can do this with any graphics that you have yourself, and you can create your own enemy. So if you followed my previous tutorial in the Getting Started guide, you should already know how to create an enemy type. It's pretty similar to the other sprite types. So what I've done is I've set the health of the enemy to a value of 3, his attack level to 1, his defense level to 1, the experience reward to 10, and the gold to 3. And later on in the tutorial we'll actually be using these stats in the actual battle itself. So another thing I've done is I've set up a couple of animations. So I've created a very simple attack animation where the character is just white. I've created a very simple defend animation where the character is just red. And then I've set the east, north, south and west animation frames to all the same picture. So again, not super flashy, but it's enough for the purposes of this tutorial. So what I'm going to start off doing is I'm going to go to the battle system board. I am going to select the sprite tool up here at the top. I'm going to make sure that I'm on the battle layer so the enemy is actually visible. I'm just going to stick a sprite here, and then I'm going to set that sprite to my enemy, Rock Cat Roll. Okay, so with that, there's one more thing I need to do. You'll see that the ID field gives you this really long, unique value by default. I just want to use something a little bit more usable in that case. So I'm just going to type in enemy as the enemy 1, because eventually we may have multiple enemies in this battle system. So it's called enemy 1. Okay, so that's actually setting up the initial enemy on the battle system. Okay, so somewhere in the future in the tutorial we'll look at adding enemies dynamically. Say when you go to the board you want a different type of enemy to show up, you'll actually place the enemy using some code, but for now this is sufficient for what we need to do. Okay, so with that, what we need to do now to get the enemy animated is we're going to animate the enemy's defending animation when the player attacks the enemy. So that's when the player has the fight action selected and they hit the enter key. That's going to trigger the attack. So what we're going to do now is we are going to just go down to the register key down for the enter key. I'll leave this drawer text stuff here for now. It's really for like your own debugging to say what's actually happening. And then I'm just going to go below that. And I'm going to type in RPG code dot animate sprite. So there's two things here. You can animate the main character and you can animate a sprite. And a sprite covers anything that is like an NPC or an enemy. Anything that's not a character basically that can be animated. So to animate a sprite, we need to know a few things. First, we need to know the sprite ID. So in that case, it's the ID that we just set to enemy 1. You also need to know the animation ID, which is important. So if you go back to the enemy and you go to the animations tab, you'll see that these names of the animations, these are the sprite animation IDs. So these are all the default ones. There's about 13 default ones. So attack, defend. So we're going to be interested in the defend one. You can even add your own custom ones, so you could always add like a custom slot, custom 1. So if you wanted to create one, and it's alphabetically sorted, so then it's there, and you could create your own custom animation. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're just going to type Okay, so there's another part to that as well that I need to talk about, and it's the callback. So basically, what the callback does is it means when you call animate sprite, it takes time for the animation itself to actually happen. And in JavaScript, the code does not stop, it continues past that point. So you have to have a callback, which means when the animation has finished playing, call this piece of code. So for now, we're going to pretty much leave that blank. We might put a bit of debugging stuff into it, but we'll keep it blank. I'll tell you what we'll do is we'll move the draw code here into that callback just to show you. So animate sprite, give it your sprite ID. Okay, enemy 1. Animation ID, I want the defend animation, and I'm gonna just define a simple callback in here. So this piece of code in here will be called the moment the animation ends, and what we're going to do is we're going to render that render the text. Okay, so I'm just going to kick that off, and I'll just simply show you. So now if I have fight selected and I hit that, you can see that he turns red, and then the word fight appears. Okay, so there's a few problems with this. Firstly, if I select run and I hit enter, it also does the attack animation or the defend animation and displays run. So we don't want that. So that's one problem with it. There's also another subtle problem, whereas if I were to spam the enter key, it would just keep happening. And now there's tons of animations all queued up waiting. So there's a few reasons for that. So the first thing we need to fix is we only want the attack to take place if they've selected the attack action. And that's a pretty simple thing to achieve. Basically what we can do here is we can say, we can use something called an if statement, which means it checks a condition has been met. So we will check if action, the value of action is equal to fight, then allow the defend animation to play. So what we need to do is we need to go ahead and we just need to say if action equals fight, then call that code. So a couple of quirks if you're not familiar with JavaScript and you're coming from maybe a different programming language. Strict equality, so saying that something is equal to something else. If you need to do it with like pieces of text, you need to use the triple equals rather than sometimes in other programming languages you have to use double or another function. But in JavaScript's case, we're using the triple equals. That's just some quirks with JavaScript itself. So now what will happen is if I run this, I set the fight, it plays that, but if I hit run, now nothing happens. And that's because the action is the run action, and we're not playing the defend animation. Okay, so there's still the other problem where if I hit that, I can like queue up a ton of defend animations. So to get around that, what we need to do is we need to introduce another variable. So we need to introduce a variable, which is basically it's a boolean or a true or false value. So, and what we're going to call that is we're going to call that in action, and we're going to set that by default to false. So what that value represents is if the player is in an action, so they are either fighting or they are running. When that happens, set the value to true. Okay, so we're gonna basically what we're gonna do here is we're gonna say if in action okay, so equals true, You could also write this in a few different ways, but this is the most explicit way for me to show other people. And what we're going to say is we're going to use a key word in JavaScript, which is the return keyword. And what that means is it means if the player is in an action, immediately return from this function. So that means immediately return from the register key down code. So don't go this far. So it won't even go near here. So basically what it will do is it will say, oh, I'm in an action, and it will just say, I'm going to leave because I can't do anything. And then the code will continue. So what we need to do is we actually need to set that somewhere. So basically what we want to do is we want to say, if they're in an action, if they're not in an action, and the action is equal to fight, then the first thing we want to do is we want to say that they are in an action. So now they are doing something, and we don't want them to be able to do multiple things at the same time. So this stops the player from hitting enter and triggering the same action a bunch of times. Okay, so if we just do that on its own, you'll see I could only do it once. So it only worked once. So basically what's happened is we have set in action to true here, but we never set it back to false. And the place that we actually want to set it back to false is after the animation has stopped playing. So basically in here, in the animate sprite, we added this callback here, which shows the text to be rendered. So what we want to do in here is we also want to say, as soon as the animation ends, draw the text, and the player is no longer in the action. So false. And if I start that again, you can see I won't be able to queue up that many, so it doesn't stay red as long as it did before. So that basically prevents the user from just spamming enter and queuing a bunch of them up. We could also do some other things such as adding timers in there and things like that. But we don't need that for our battle system, because what's going to happen in our battle system is once the player has processed their turn, so once they've taken their action for their turn, it will switch to the enemy's turn. And that's what we're going to look at next. So we're going to take a look at once the player has processed their action for their turn, let's switch it over to the enemy, and we'll have the enemy perform the attack, and we'll animate the attack animation. So just to summarize what we covered in this video, basically what we've done is we've expanded the enter logic. So we've added an enemy to the board, which has some animations, and in the enter key down handler, we have done some processing of the action that the user is carrying out. So we're saying if the player uses the fight action, then we do something, we animate the enemy's defend animation. And in the future we'll come in here and we'll actually apply some damage to the enemy and see if the enemy has been defeated and should the battle end. So that's for a future tutorial, but the next tutorial we're going to take a look at having the enemy attack and animating the enemy's attack animation. But that's it for today.